we all have what we call heart places, places that we fall in love with, just like we fall in love with people. And one of my heart places is the snow. And I fell in love with snow before I even met snow, because I grew up in Perth, which is about as far from snow as you can get. But of course, all our fairy stories and all the fantasies that I was reading as a child were full of snow and the magic of it, the enchantment of it. And then when I moved to Sydney and had the opportunity to start visiting Namaji, Australia's snowy mountains, I fell in love with a real place. And so that has become my escape. When I found out that snow in Australia could be really drastically affected by climate change, if we continue on our path and don't turn this around, by about 2070, you've just got fleeting bits of snow and it doesn't really stay on the ground. That was the gut punch that put me on this path of climate grief. My partner is the famous Robin Williams, the presenter of the science show on ABC, National Living Treasure, as he is officially. And in 2015, he got cancer.
It was as if a psychedelic hand grenade had gone off behind my eyes.
And early in that process, when he was just starting the chemo and he wasn't too sick, we were home and I hear a thump. And there on the floor, white, is my partner of 25 years. And his eyes are rolling, his face, his mouth is doing this. He's not breathing. I know that these thoughts come back from my days as a vet, that this is agonal breathing. And I'm racing to his side and all these thoughts are going through my head like, this is it. This is the moment. This is the day he dies. This is it right now. And I'm checking for a pulse. I don't even know how to do CPR. I don't know whether you can do CPR if they don't have a pulse at that point. And finally, I think about 3 minutes have gone by and I know that after 4 minutes, it's brain damage. And I'm looking down at one of the smartest people on the planet and I just go, and I start pushing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And on 6, a pink line ran up his whole body and up his head and he woke up and he said, "Why are you crying?" It was that profound moment where, you realise that your partner can actually die. And once you know you can't unknow that, you love them, right? And you don't turn away in denial. You actually do whatever you can to save the one you love, whether it's going to work or not. And later on, when I was thinking about how we think about our actions for climate change long term, if you just think about the fact that those you love, your kids, the heart places that are at stake, look, if you love them, then you don't look away. You do whatever you can. Now, that might not work, but you have to try, right? It's not a political book, no. In fact, this book is completely different to anything I've seen, and that was one of the driving factors for me deciding I had no desire to write a book, but I could not find a book out there that wasn't lecturing to me, but just kind of took me on a journey through which I actually got to connect emotionally and find some ways through for myself. So with no book out there like that, I wrote that book, and look, the clue is in the title. So it's called Beyond Climate Grief, but very importantly, a journey of love, snow, fire, and an enchanted beer can. There's really surprising stories in it. I told you a couple of negative ones, but there's really joyful stories. And you've got interviews with Craig Rucastle and Charlie Pickering, the comedians. You've got the story of the enchanted beer can, just to surprise you. You've got the amazing story of the Castlemaine kids who single-handedly basically took the Greta movement and kickstarted it into a global movement. It's so inspiring. I hope this is a book that you'll actually really enjoy.
Welcome everyone to the Cuppa of Life Cafe. I'm your host Cookie. Good morning. It's Friday morning here. and wherever you're watching today, welcome to this session. Now, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connections to lands, water and community. I pay my respects to them and to their cultures and to the elders, both past and present. Friday. Hopefully everyone is feeling vibey today. Thanks to everyone, Bronwyn, Anne, Liam, Rob, Dario, Cindy, Megan for joining us today. It's a different discussion today around our one of our pillars in the Cuppa of Life Cafe around sustainability and climate change, etc. So we're very excited to welcome in Dr. Jonica Newby now into the Cuppa of Life Cafe to give everyone a warm welcome. And Jonica, can you please pop in? That'll be great. Turn on your camera and mic. Welcome.
Hi there.
Video.
What? Sorry, you cracked up there. What was it?
I cracked up as I made a joke, or cracked up as in?
No, I couldn't hear what you said.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, what an emotional video. Does that still get to you a little bit?
Yeah, it does. It does, actually. That was one of the first times I told those stories. That event with my partner, I never told anyone really about it until I wrote the book. And so the only reason I put it in the book, it was private and very personal, was because as I say in the video, I began to see these really profound analogies between what you do for love for partner and how to think about what you would do for love of place, children, all the things that are at stake as we contemplate our changing, warming world.
And we're going to get to the book in a second, and I'm very keen to understand about this enchanted beer can as an FYI. But just for people that don't know you, maybe they haven't seen you on the ABC over the last 18 years or whatever, can you give everyone a little bit of your background, please? That'll be great, just to set the scene.
Yeah, well, just to surprise everyone, I trained as a veterinarian. So I grew up in Perth. So the reason I became a science reporter is because I really, really wanted to. So, look, I was one of those kids who I grew up not reading factual books, actually. I grew up reading science fiction and fantasy. And that's what fueled my interest in science. So then, age 15, I think, I love animals. I'll become a vet, because you know everything at 15. And then later on, I was like, that creative side, that fascination with the world is not being met by being a vet. So I actually engineered a plan to try and become a science reporter on Catalyst. And it took me 7 years. But yeah, when I got there, I went, I was right. This is my fit. And I stayed there 20 years.
It's incredible. And you did like over 300 different science experiments. Over that time. Do you have a favourite?
Look, there were so many. I mean, I did tend to keep coming back to a couple of themes. One was climate change and our transition to a better energy system. And the other, though, was, how we think and behave, all these things from animal to human and the crossover between it, about empathy, emotions. I did stories on sociopathy. But look, if I had to pick a few, Cancer and Exercise was probably one of the most influential, important films they ever made. There was a beautiful one on music on the brain and why music matters to us. Beautiful, fun one on making dogs happy, but all-time favourite, Female Sex Drive. Because it was, being a science reporter and being prepared to talk openly, I knew that I could talk about a taboo subject in a G-rated slot on television, so for a general audience, and actually address something that no one was talking about, which is some of the HRT and things like that are available, amongst other topics. So yeah, not only was that creatively really fun the way I did the visuals with these kind of stylized 1950s vignettes, but it actually gave information that I'd never seen anywhere else. So there you go.
That seems like a common theme for you, about trying to find these little moments that haven't been seen anywhere else. Is that sort of where also the book came from? So the book is called Beyond Climate Grief, A Journey of Love, Snow, Fire and the Enchanted Beer Can. But you've taken a different spin that I haven't heard anyone speak about at the moment. So can you give a bit of context around what the book's all about, even further from what we've just seen on the video.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, most of the sort of climate books out there, you feel like you have to read them because you need the information, but they don't connect with me emotionally. And I'm an emotional person, as you might have guessed, but I think a lot of people are, and we know that things don't feel real to us until they hit us emotionally. And so when that happened to me, when this abstract thing I knew intellectually about climate change suddenly became really viscerally personal, when I realized what it was going to do to a place that I personally love, you know, I was devastated. You know, I really struggled to cope. It's part of the first chapter of the book. I ended up, for the first time in my life, seeking antidepressants. That's how flattened I was by it. And I figured I couldn't be the only person who was struggling. Maybe others wouldn't be like I am, but so I wanted to write a book that not only helped me through a sort of emotional journey of how do I live with this knowledge, you know, how do I live a good and happy life, but also would help others who were reading it. But also because I had such a background in storytelling and you know, my interest in reading and watching fiction and fantasy, I wanted to tell a ripping yarn so that it would actually be something that you would want to read, not just felt like, do I have to read this? You know.
So a lot of this, you also like interviewed and spoke to, you know, scientists that also showed their emotion and cried as well. Is that when you started to think, well, like I know you said you wanted to open up a book where other people could share their emotions as well, but to see those people working in it day in and day out and focus on it and how much emotion they may have, like, did that really cut through to you as well with the scientists?
Yeah. Look, originally I had no intention of writing a book. So this event where I suddenly had this realization, and it was quite a profound moment. It was this moment when I was up in this on holidays in Japan, my first ever time skiing there, and so I'll tell you the moment quickly. So I was there, you know, hanging out, having a great time with a ski instructor on holiday, and I suddenly went, what's a Swiss ski instructor doing here on holidays? You know, it's January, his busiest time of the year. And he said, I wanted to find good snow. Right. And it turned out there'd been no snow that year in Europe.
Right.
And to that point. And then later that week, half the Great Barrier Reef died. And so that was when I had the gut punch and thinking, well, this could happen to snow and it could happen in my lifetime. But this was a really personal thing, and I spent a year researching it. But a couple of years later, so we're up to 2019 now, I started hearing similar stories from other people. And part of it was when I was researching what was really going to happen to snow, you know, I'd suddenly find that these scientists were crying. And then I started having these phone calls, like with this young coral scientist who'd talk about swimming around and his mask would fill with tears. And I just woke up, you know, middle of 2019, late one night, and I just went, oh, I think I need to write a book, because only a book can kind of take this journey and literally be asking the questions I'm asking, which is, tell me, please, everyone, I want wisdom, you know, how do I work my way through this? And I didn't actually just want to ask scientists, because that's not a mainstream thing. That's another niche. Hence asking the Missy Higgins and the Charlie Pickering and the surprising people. But what was doubly surprising, and I can talk about all the positives, you know, that I got out of them, but when I started talking to them, they started crying too. So it just showed that there's this, it's like people are penting up this feeling and don't know who to have the conversation with. And if it stays pent up, as we know, you can't work through it. You just get stuck in either denial or anger or overwhelm.
So I was just going to ask the chat room, I'd love to understand what people's emotions are around climate change, are they suffering any climate grief? Just put it in the chat room now, just that one feeling you get when we speak about climate change or things that may be affecting it. I'm just keen to see what they say in the chat room. You mentioned some pretty important people that feature in the book. Was there a reason why you chose those people?
Oh, yeah, totally. So first of all, I love them. So Missy Higgins, tick. But also, like I said, I definitely wanted a mainstream book. Like, the only interview with a scientist is in the first chapter and about the 10th. So most of the expert advice that's in there is emotional advice. It's from top psychologists and people, but also just ordinary people who have a lot of wisdom. So Missy Higgins, well, yeah, huge fan. But I found out that she'd had an experience really close to mine where she ended up really depressed and shattered about climate. And she eventually made this album called Solastalgia, which is just beautiful. It's some of her best ever music. And it's all about climate grief. So it's like her album is like my book, if you understand. And so I went to see her and to talk about, why music is so powerful and emotional and helpful in working through things, and also how this kind of grief can get turned into beautiful art, creativity. But she also had some fantastic tips about strategies for preventing overwhelm, which I now adopt, and you can read about them in the book. Charlie Pickering, I always wanted to have a chapter in there called Humour. And this goes back to, and it's an unexpected chapter. See, people get so po-faced about all this, and actually laughter is one of our best strategies for actually facing reality, right? So, when my partner got sicker and sicker, even after that awful CPR moment, when I had to bring him back to life, things got worse after that, believe it or not. And as things got worse, I found myself writing this newsletter to his friends and family, and I put all these jokes in it. And the worse things got, the stupider my newsletters got. And it made me reflect on how important humour is when all the time in, all our social interactions, but also in dealing with hard stuff. And so as the book went on, because I started writing it, I can't remember if I've mentioned, but I started writing it in October 2019. So the book could not be the book that I set out to write, because the fires started coming. It turned into a memoir of basically me trying to write a book like this during the 6 months that the future arrived. And the future arrived in such a way that we felt like we were living in, let's face it, a novel. I mean, who watching did not feel at some point like
some sort of movie or something like that was going on.
Exactly. So I asked even people who'd lost their homes, or I asked them all, hey, did you tell any jokes about it? And no one's asked them that. And they all smile and laugh and relax and go, and then they tell me the jokes, and those little jokes are in there. And so laughter is so important. And Charlie and I were talking about it a lot, but it's because it actually does some really interesting neurobiological things to us that we need in those moments. Look, another person I put in there was Mike Cannon-Brookes. And the reason is I wanted a chapter on leadership, because you also need some inspiration, right, in the book. Totally. So there's coping mechanisms, there's parents, but you also need some serious inspiration. And, there are people, it's like, I had this analogy, it's like I felt partway through this like I was living Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, because I think those analogies really work. Because Lord of the Rings, for example, was written after World War II. So the reason why it feels similar to climate change, where there's this big sort of unfathomable, world-threatening kind of reality, and you do what you can to address it. But you also need heroes that are going to, give you an idea of a better future than that. And so Mike Cannon-Brookes, he's like something out of a .com, central casting film, let's face it. The ball cap and all the rest and ponytail. And he's going to build a friggin' great solar cable to Singapore, and it's really going to happen. And there's this inspiring vision of this incredible economic and better future that Australia can have that I wanted to outline in the book too, because I think a lot of people don't get it yet, what it means when we talk about looking for 500-600% renewable power. And so using those, science reporter skills I had from Catalyst, I just broke it down into really, really fun, easy way to understand it as part of the story. So, yeah, and then the book actually just ended up with a whole lot of people you would never have heard of, like my mum, because
every book needs a mum story in there.
Look, brother's in it. So if you sit still long enough, you'll be in it in the next one, because the book wasn't meant to be personal. But, of course, we never think disaster's coming for us. And, of course, disaster came for us. Mum lives in Malakuta. So the last part of the book ended up being about also, really useful stuff like disaster brain, which we've all been in for the last year.
Yes.
So it helps explain, that to people. And I think, when we went straight from fires to COVID, I didn't really see much written about the reality of disaster brain and what's happening and why we keep doom scrolling and all that sort of thing. So there's, it was quite a journey. I'm exhausted talking about it.
There seems like there's a lot of great information in there that people can grasp on, especially if they're feeling the emotion of climate grief. Like when I asked that question in the chat room, we had people saying that they feel concerned and frustrated, they feel sad, they feel fearful, they feel huge stress and sadness. And Sharon wrote, and this is an important one because you replicate this to, saving life of your family member or whatever it is. She goes, I struggle to know what to say to my son. I've got a 3-year-old daughter, one on the way. You're talking about the potential fact that, if nothing's done, that we won't have snow on the mountains in 2070. That is quite an alarming fact, and how do you have that conversation with your kids around climate change and climate grief as well? So, yeah, it's pretty. Please.
Yeah. So, look, I'm not going to give you a glib answer, and I hate to say please read the book, but I will say please read the book because, I realise trying to give glib answers to anything is a bit like saying, oh, how did you get through the death of your partner? Go. You do it in 4 sentences. It is a journey with a whole lot of things that add up together to actually give you a different perspective. And because I asked lots of different people sort of similar questions, how do they get through? I hope that there's a different thing that might appeal to different people. But one of the specific chapters is answering that question. There's a whole chapter called What Should Parents Tell Their Kids, basically.
Right.
Chapter called Worry. And I went out to find 3 different child psychologists who could give some insight on this. And there's actually a kind of algorithm, if you like, about how to talk to your kids about this. So the principles are there. There's also on my website, there'll be some links, which I'm still only making the website, but there'll be some links to some of the resources from the Australian Psychological Society. But yeah, I thought it was super important, and how you be honest and realistic while still maintaining positivity and a sense of purpose. And so the algorithm, just very quickly, and it makes no sense when I just say it glibly, but it does make sense when you see it in context. But stage 1, name and validate the emotion. And so in a way, my book is doing that for all of us, saying climate is real, validate it, and then it's much easier to process it and understand it in yourself and in others and share it. So validate and name the emotion. Second thing is change what you can, and this is the action part of what you can. And the third part is accept what you can't. And I think that's
a big one
for adults, and particularly activists who are not necessarily the target audience for this book. A lot of people, the answer would be on the change part, do more. But for the activists who are already doing everything, then accepting what they can't change is the really hard part, because then they feel guilty and get hit by overwhelm and like they're not doing enough and going to burnout. So that kind of self-care and going, you know, what's outside your control, it is outside your control. And that's hard for me. It's hard for all of us, but that's actually part of the ongoing journey with it. And within that, with the kids, it was also look for heroes. And this was probably one of the most beautiful, profound things in there. So there's a chapter in there, mothers out there and fathers you'll love, which is the chapter on the Castlemaine kids. And once you've read that, you won't be so worried about your kids. So motivated by having a passion and a sense of meaning. And I do think that that's a real positive going forward. You know, things have got a bit trivial in the last decade or so. Yes. You know what I mean? Like we've focused on stuff that didn't matter, and it's almost like 2020 is going, refocus, guys. What means the most to you? And I think a lot of us have been doing that.
If anyone's got any questions for Dr. Jonica, I know my signal might be a little bit off at the moment. I can just see it online. It's a little bit fuzzy. But if there's any questions for Dr. Jonica, please let me know right now. Now, I've got to ask, what's the Enchanted Beer Can? Do I have to read the book, or can you give me some sort of indication?
Oh, no, I can tell you that one because I can give that one away. Look, it's one of many surprising stories in there. Again, this is like, I didn't want to write a book that would be dreary to read. I mean, God, climate books are really dreary. You know, so there's a story of Postmistress Pam and Squiggy the Pig, for example, and there's an amazing story of Nicholas and the disaster movie Dash, which I call it. But the Enchanted Beer Can is part of the humour chapter. I loved the word enchanted in there because I keep thinking back in the book to the parallels between what's happening in real life and Lord of the Rings and those kind of, you know, those language of epic narrative that we turn to when things are overwhelming. You know, we all, when the fires were on, we all, you know, we're talking about apocalypse and all of this, you know, like epic narrative. So the word enchanted for the beer can just kind of gives a hint at that part of the book. But then it's funny, you know, it's sweet, it's funny. And so the story is actually a story that Charlie Pickering told me. Amazing. And it's not that funny, but it's just so laconic and Aussie. So basically, in Black Saturday fires, because I interviewed Charlie in the November, so it was just before everything really kicked off, you know. So he was reflecting on the Black Saturday fires and a story a friend had told him about a guy who was in the Black Saturday fires. And, you know, back then, a lot of the men stayed home to defend without anyone else, and that's how a lot of them ended up losing their lives. And anyway, so this guy, he'd stayed to defend on his property and, you know, he was ready. And then he sees this absolute unbelievable monster of a fire, like any biblical or epic narrative beast, come over the hill. And he goes, you know, I'm not stopping that. So he goes, if my moment's up, I'm going with a beer in my hand. So he goes along to the fridge, he gets out the beer, he goes onto his porch looking at the fire, and he pops open the top of the can. And at that moment, the wind changes and the fire goes away. So
this says alcohol isn't good for you. Anyway, that's an amazing story and a great one to finish up on today, Jonica. Thank you so much for attending the Cuppa of Life Cafe. Is there one thing that you can, is there anything you want to finish off today with people and give them some hope and opportunity to be able to make a difference in this world?
There's so many things. I think just to go back to that very first point is that we can have a tendency, if we don't process these things emotionally, to look away or just do trivial things and think that that'll be okay. But if you think about the analogy of having a partner or a child with a cancer diagnosis, you have lots of fun in the moment. You know, you don't forget your life, but that you keep your eye forward on everything you can do to bring the best possible future. So you don't, you in parallel live a good life now, but also do the things to to do for the future. So if anyone's got a business or anything like that, and they haven't been able to get their heads around this, well, that's the way to think about it for life. So we'll do better every year, you know. The second thing is, I suppose, the hope and meaning that I got out of this, and because I had to think about how to write those couple of chapters when this whole world went in a direction, as well as the book, that none of us expected. But given that I was already thinking about emotions and pro-social emotions, one of the things that was really inspiring was that when the chips are down, most of us, I'd say 80% of us, let's say 20% of us are a bit more sociopathic, let's forget them, but the majority of us actually are overwhelmed by a desire to help each other, and be that physically help, donate, send jokes and reassurance through online systems when we're in lockdown. You know, these are the pro-social emotions coming forward. And then the big one, the emotion I finish with, is pride, a really underrated emotion. But this emotion evolved to make us feel amazingly good about doing right by our group. I mean, most of the things that made me cry were things like watching the Rural Fire Service volunteers or the nurses going in and doing the right thing. And so I think when the chips are down, the best in humanity just gets brought out, and we need to hang on to that, and that's what gives me hope and meaning.
What a great way to finish this morning session this morning. Thank you so much, Dr. Jonica Newby, for attending today. In the offers area, you'll be able to see Dr. Jonica's book, so please make sure that you purchase that if anything resonates today, and by the looks from Sharon and Cindy, it has. So thank you so much, Jonica, for joining us this morning in the Cuppa of Life Cafe. You can switch off your camera and mic now. I'm just going to close the room.
My pleasure. Thank you. Have a lovely Friday, everyone.
Please make sure that you give a wave of gratitude in the chat room now for Jonica. We love sending the chat room to our guests so they can see all the amazing comments, etc. For everyone, get ready for next week. And next week we have Ben Higgins joining us. Now, we spoke with Ben last week. I've just put it into the offers area. Ben Higgins was on The Bachelor in the US. Now, that's not the reason why we're getting him on here, as an FYI. But he's also the co-founder of Generous Coffee, who gives a number of different supports a number of different children within the Brazilian area, and is a really powerful eye-opener for someone who's looking for his life was perfect. He's written a book called Alone in Plain Sight, and it's going to be an incredible chat with Ben on the day as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Click on that now and register for Ben's session. It is on Tuesday, the 13th of April. That is it for this week. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us again in the Cuppa of Life Cafe, and we'll see you next week. Bye.